I grew up with the language around me, with my mom and my uncles and my aunties all speaking the language. But they didn't teach it to the children. And if you ask a lot of people why they didn't teach the children, why they didn't expect the children to learn the language, they'll say that it was because of the boarding schools. They weren't allowed to speak the language, and that they in fact were often hit when they spoke the language. So, and you know, for them, they didn't want their children to be speaking the language, or else they would get beaten for it.
Our language cannot be written down. They're trying to write it down now, using the stupid European alphabet. 26 characters! And they expect you to have a decent language. See, that's why English is the language of deceit. Very easy to lie in English. That's why business is conducted in English, the whole world, because it is a deceitful language. My nation, the Lakota, we were the first nation to militarily defeat the United States of America on the field of battle. And it ended in 1868, when the United States of America begged us for peace, and we gave it to them. And they wanted to sign a treaty of peace based on international law. And so we granted that to them. In fact, we already knew the Washichu couldn't be trusted. So we allowed him to write his treaty of peace in his own language so he could understand it. And he still lied. He signed the treaty with us, agreeing to everything we said. Got as far back as going back to Washington, D.C. to pass the treaty with the Congress and the President. They stopped in Chicago and changed the treaty and took away all our land that was in the state, that is now in the state of Nebraska. We own 80% of Nebraska.
I just went to the United States Congress and I told them that their own courts, their highest court, ruled that they stole sacred land from us. I told them they took trillions of dollars worth of uranium, gold, timber, other resources off that land they stole. Our people are to date impoverished. Why? America has to settle up. They're not keeping their promises they made in the treaties. These treaties are law, according to their system, under their own constitution. Article 6, Supreme Law of the Land. The chiefs back then retained possession of the sacred Black Hills in those treaties. They subsequently stole the Black Hills when they discovered gold in them. They still retain ownership of those stolen lands that they have to make settlement for yet. The issue's still alive on those stolen lands that they got.
I think if anyone could have done anything to help us with the black kills, truly, I believe that it would have been Russel Means. He was such an activist, and even though I may not agree totally with what he does, yet I believe that the fire and the spirit he has to get to keep the rights of the Indian, of the Lakota people, and also to make the government honor the treaties and to make them to hold them to that. I don't know of anyone but Russel Means that could have done that, and that could maybe still do it, but I know Russel Means is not doing well, that he's sick, and he's getting older, you know.
They're supposed to do this in either the spring or the fall, but I'm doing it now because I'm already dead. Okay. Last February, on my weekly commentary on YouTube, I cut my hair. In our way, that means someone you love or close to you died. And you cut your hair in mourning. Well, I cut my hair because my people are dying. Coincidentally, 3 months later, I find out I'm dying. I have cancer of the tongue, and it has spread to my lungs and my lymph nodes, my neck. And I have a few months or more. According to the doctors, I have a few months or more to live. But I'll tell you this, I've always said, as long as I've been in the struggle for freedom, that I'm going to be obstinate. I'm going to live at least as long until I see the demise of the United States of America's government. Well, guess what? Right now, today, the American empire is dying. It's disintegrating. So now I can go home. Now I can go to the other side.
We come in peace. Not in peace. That's peace sign. Now he comes in peace, but I make peace signs.
We'll learn more about this artifact later on, as it ties together Nicholas Roerich with Henry Wallace, Manly P. Hall, and what some believe will be the future destiny of America. Like many who are involved in New Age and occult ideas, Nicholas Roerich dreamed of a united one world order.
Nicholas Roerich is seen as one of the key individuals, historical individuals, that had a lot to do with the development of the League of Nations and subsequently the United Nations, and is recognized as such in the United Nations building. I'm told, I haven't seen such commemoration, but I'm told it's there. And the history of the United Nations is often characterized in association with Nicholas Roerich's global peace efforts.
Roerich's dream was shared by his disciple, Henry Wallace, as demonstrated by the book Henry A. Wallace, His Search for a New World Order. This concept is visualized by the cracked bronze globe that sits outside the United Nations building, where a new world is literally breaking forth from the old. But somehow, Rorick's ideas on the subject would get him into trouble with Wallace when he traveled abroad on behalf of the United States government. In the book, Tournament of Shadows, we read that Rorick had been chosen by Henry Wallace to scour Central Asia for drought-resistant grasses to combat the Dust Bowl. This was the genesis of the Rorick expedition, financed and staffed by the Department of Agriculture. But during his 2-year expedition, Rorick seemed to be on a mystical journey, one that involved his quest for the legendary city of Shambhala, and literally searching for signs of the second coming of Christ.
Nicholas Rorick's idea was that the second coming of Christ may happen within years, and that's why he visited India, China, etc., and Russia, and digging up and trying to locate spiritual centers and spiritual information along those lines.
Authors Meyer and Bryzak write that the search for Shambhala, which he identified with the second coming of Christ and the Maitreya, or Buddha to come, obsessed Rorick. His paintings and writings thereafter conjured up his vision of a new age of peace, brotherhood, and enlightenment. But Rorick's concept of Christ, shown here in one of his paintings, was dramatically different from that of traditional Christianity. Both Rorick and Wallace were members of the Theosophical Society that was founded by Madame H.P. Blavatsky in the late 19th century. Blavatsky's view of religion can be summed up in her book, The Secret Doctrine. She makes use of the phrase demon est deus inversus, which means the devil is God inverted. Her view was based on the ancient Gnostic belief that in the Garden of Eden, the serpent who tempted the woman was really an angel of light, and that God, who had created Adam and Eve, was really the devil. The reason is because God had forbidden man from partaking of the tree of knowledge, or gnosis. This is the origin of the term Gnostic, or Gnosticism. Blavatsky further argued that Jesus was only one Messiah among many, like Buddha, Krishna, and Muhammad, and that the fifth Buddha, also called the Maitreya, is the last Messiah who will come. She says he will appear as Maitreya Buddha, the last of the avatars, or way-showers. This belief and expectation are universal throughout the East. This is the event that is said to have consumed Nicholas Rorick, and that he would have taught to his devoted disciple, Henry Wallace. The proof of their bizarre relationship was more fully revealed in a series of letters penned by Wallace to Nicholas Rorick.
Newsweek with Westbrook Pegler and others made a very big story out of what they called the Guru letters, the letters that Henry Wallace would send to Nicholas Rorick, which obviously he considered him a spiritual teacher from that standpoint.
Wallace had gone from being Secretary of Agriculture to FDR's Vice President. Though his falling out with Rorick had happened some years earlier, the Guru letters would surface once he decided to run for president. They had been obtained by cantankerous news columnist Westbrook Pegler through an unidentified source. Pegler, along with H.L. Mencken, questioned Wallace in a news conference about the letters, but he was, at best, evasive and refused to answer their questions in a direct manner. The letters were signed H.A.W., assumed to be Henry Asgard Wallace. In one of the letters, Wallace allegedly wrote of curing his headaches at formal dinners by rubbing his forehead with a Tibetan amulet. In another letter, he said to Rorick, "I have been thinking of you holding the casket, the sacred, most precious casket, and I have thought of the new country going forth, and I have thought of the admonition, await the stone, the sign of Shambhala."
There's these letters, And they indicate very strongly, no matter how you want to interpret them, that he was his teacher.
Wallace went on to say, "We await the stone, and we welcome you again to this glorious land of destiny." The stone he's referring to is the artifact that cipher expert Buff Perry has been following for many years now. We learned about this mysterious stone during our first interview with Perry at Manly Hall's Philosophical Research Society, where a statuette of Nicholas Roerich, holding a casket like the one described by Wallace, sits on one of the tables in the library. It was first mentioned to us by Dr. Obadiah Harris.
Now, Dr. Harris, can you tell us about this statue here?
Oh well, this would be a very favorite thing to Manly Hall. This is Nicholas Roerich, who lived in the early part of well, actually, he lived even in the 20th century up until 1947. There's a Roerich Museum in New York, and this, of course, is of Mr. Roerich himself. Then there's this little casket, and in this casket symbolizes what he was given, which is the foundation stone of America. And we don't know where that stone is today. I think that Buff Perry knows a little more about where it might be now.
We then asked Buff Perry to explain the stone in relation to the statue of Nicholas Roerich.
The statue is based on a painting his wife Helena painted of him. The casket he's holding with a cloth fabric, a kind of sacred, appearing to be Tibetan cloth fabric over it, is a casket that contains a stone that variously has been called the Chintamani in Sanskrit, meaning the stone of wisdom, the Bethel stone, which was Jacob's pillow stone, that you read about in Torah in the Old Testament, which became known as a Bethel stone, because it was used at the location of what became the town of Bethel, so Bethel. So this stone has an incredible history to it that has only recently really surfaced in terms of how it ended up in the hands of Nicholas Roerich, where it came from.
There can be no question that this stone in the casket consumed Roerich through the latter part of his life. His paintings are filled with the repeated imagery of it.
And here you have a man delivering that casket up again. It appears in, it seems like almost all of Roerich's paintings. These are supposed to be his family and ascendant masters carrying the Rothenberg casket in which that stone was kept.
Roerich called the stone the treasure of the world. Even his wife, Helena, is pictured in this portrait, which hangs in the Roerich Museum, with the casket resting next to her, something she and her husband had received under mysterious circumstances in 1923.
Everything changed once they received this.
But why would this artifact be of interest to FDR's Vice President, Henry Wallace? And how could it relate to the design of the Great Seal on the dollar bill? As Buff mentioned earlier, the stone is said to be the pillow stone of Jacob, upon which he had his dream of a ladder that stretched from earth to heaven, with the angels of God ascending and descending on it. The ladder itself is a recurring symbol in secret societies, especially Freemasonry. Master Mason Albert Pike wrote extensively of Jacob's Ladder in his book, Morals and Dogma, and even suggests that Jacob's Ladder may in fact have been a pyramid. The book of Genesis tells us that when Jacob awoke from his dream, he took the stone and set it up for a pillar, and he said, "This stone, which I have set for a pillar, shall be God's house." As a result, some have come to believe that God, or the power of God, resides in the stone itself. From there, the legends vary, but one account says that the prophet Jeremiah took the stone and carried it into Scotland, where eventually the Scottish kings were crowned upon it.
In late March 1306, Robert the Bruce was enthroned as King of Scots at Scone in Perthshire.
An old Scottish poem says, "Except old seers do feign, and wizard wits be blind, the Scots in place must reign, where they this stone shall find." Eventually, the stone was kept at Scone Palace and was hence called the Stone of Scone. To this day, the Scots also call it the Stone of Destiny. In the year 1296, King Edward I of England captured the stone, and it was taken to Westminster Abbey for the crowning of English monarchs. In this picture, you can see the stone itself in the compartment beneath the coronation chair, a chair that was specifically built to house the Stone of Destiny. The last monarch to be crowned upon it was Queen Elizabeth II in 1953. In 1897, the English supposedly returned the ancient stone to the Scots, with the understanding that the future monarchs of England would continue to be crowned upon it. Even a self-guided tour where visitors can view the Stone of Destiny along with the honours of Scotland, the crown jewels of Scottish royalty. According to the tour guide we spoke with while there, this is the legendary stone. But if this is true, then how could the stone have ended up inside a casket in the hands of Nicholas Roerich? The answer, given by Buff Perry and others, is that the stone currently at Edinburgh is a fake.
The stone of Scone, because the one that's actually in Edinburgh Castle is a fake, and most Scots know it. Because once the English came and stole it once, they were never going to be stolen again. So the one that's actually in the castle is not real.
Others, like Alex Salmond, the First Minister of Scotland, claim that the stone taken by the English king in 1296 was a fake, and that the real stone was somehow hidden away secretly by the Scots. Exactly where the real Stone of Destiny is today, and how it may have changed hands over the centuries, continues to be a matter of debate. Nevertheless, its importance is recognized by nearly all occult societies in the world today.
It is the foundation stone of all history. It's also called the Philosopher's Stone. It has the lapis exilis in the Grail literature cycles that came out of Chrétien de Troyes and Wolfram von Eschenbach. Wolfram von Eschenbach writes in Parsifal that the stone is called the Grail.
While the Holy Grail is traditionally thought of as the cup of Christ, those involved in secret societies believe that the original and oldest form of the Grail is the Stone of Destiny, written of by Wolfram von Eschenbach in his Grail legend, Parsifal.
And he calls it lapis exilis, which is a way of saying the exiled or wandering stone. He does that because of the history known in Freemasonry and in the secret societies of this stone's movement around here and there, and where it would be would indicate the importance of that place.
The The stone, mentioned in Eschenbach's Grail legend, is a green stone that some believe is similar to a type of meteorite known as moldavite. This description is said to have been confirmed by Nicholas Roerich while he claimed to have the stone in his possession. The secret societies believe that this stone, that supposedly fell from heaven, empowers that person or place of its location.
And it has to do with the secret history of America and why that stone arrived here, who brought it.
As we showed earlier, Dr. Obadiah Harris referred to it as the foundation stone of America.
What is the significance of the foundation stone of America?
Well, the foundation stone is really about what America is about, and also what England seems to be about. And so it's really, it implies the great mysteries that was contained in the great mystery schools and of those who had this vision.
Was it this mystery school vision that guided FDR and his fellow Mason, Henry Wallace, as they set the all-seeing eye of the great architect on the back of the dollar bill? When one considers the repeated use of the word destiny by Manly Hall, who wrote of the secret destiny of America, along with FDR, who had knowledge of Hall's library and who said that Americans had a rendezvous with destiny. Is proven by the letters he wrote to Nicholas Roerich. As a Freemason, he would have seen an occult connection with America, since the Stone of Destiny is said to have come from heaven to earth, from the dog star Sirius. When the United States was founded, the architecture of Washington, D.C. was designed in alignment with the rising of Sirius in the east. July 4th, Independence Day, is the day when the sun is in conjunction with this star, said to be 23 times more powerful than the sun itself. Of Sirius to the secret societies cannot be overstated. Some believe that the secrets of this star are a matter of life and death. In our last documentary, Riddles in Stone, Dr. Robert Hieronymus explained the importance of the dog star Sirius. This happened during a casual discussion, and some of what he said took us by surprise. Listen now to his uncut explanation to understand how critical the secrecy of this symbol is to Freemasonry and all the secret societies. And as you listen, remember, it is Sirius that rises in the east behind the sun, which stands as a picture of the twofold nature of every symbol in the occult.
Interesting thing about all Freemasonry is that symbolism is ultimately very important. They don't put a lodge in the east because it's a nice place and it looks good. They put it in the east. The masters have put it in the east, so because
it's the rising sun.
It's the rising sun. You're catching the energies of the light, right. and to them, they didn't believe that the sun was God. All right, like we're told, the ancient Egyptians, we're told all the time that they thought the sun was God. Well, To simplify it, do I have time to tell them this part?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
All right. As with all secret societies, you have levels, and if you're on the lower levels, you don't even know they're upper levels. They don't even tell you.
Right.
You bump into it by accident, or someone comes along. Now, in Scottish Rite, that's something different, you know, because they know that there's a. But before then, and basically secret societies, such as, let's go to ancient Egypt. To the ancient Egyptians, the priest would tell the serfs, the guys that tilled the land, they would say, the sun is God, okay? And so they accepted that very low-level interpretation, all physical. That's not what the priest believed. What the priest believed, there was a second level. The priest believed that, no, the physical sun is not the supreme being. It's the spirit which flows through the physical sun that is the supreme deity. However, there was another level. And the priests didn't even know it. It's those that were involved and elevated to if I would have told you this 15 years ago, I might have gotten shot. But this is now, I'm so glad now that this is easy to talk about. The third level, which is a higher level of understanding, said, nope, it's not, that's not the sun. The sun is not the supreme deity. Nope, yes, spiritual energies come through the sun. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is the star Sirius.
The dog star.
The dog star, because the dog star was everything to the ancient Egyptians, with the rising of the Nile and the feeding of the people, and so.
Augustine says that Washington D.C. was you know, the dog star was important in the founding of Washington D.C.
Indeed, it was, yes, and that's a reflection on America. But the point I was just trying to make was that third level is never told. And with every group, every secret society I belong to, over but 15 or 16. I don't belong to any of them now. I can't.
15 to 16
different
societies?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Well, there were many different types.
While Dr. Hieronymus's claims of belonging to more than a dozen secret societies might sound incredible, it is important to remember that he is the most highly recognized authority on the history of the Great Seal.
Eye in the triangle in the pyramid.
And he is closely associated with the leading Masonic apologist in America, Dr. S. Brent Morris.
Now, you know, Bob Hieronymus, Dr. Bob, is the expert on the Great Seal.
Because of this, we believe the insights of Dr. Hieronymus not only into the Great Seal, but also on the importance of the dog star Sirius to secret societies becomes that much more significant. Listen again to what he says about Sirius when we make mention of the book on the secret design of Washington, D.C. by Masonic author David Oveson.
And so
Augustine says that Washington, D.C. was you know, the dog star was important in the founding of Washington, D.C.
Indeed, it was, yes, and that's a reflection on America. That's a reflection on America.
How is Sirius a reflection on America, according to the secret societies? And is it just a coincidence that the Stone of Destiny, awaited by an American vice president and supposedly in the possession of his guru, is said to have come from this blazing star? In the occult, the stone is not only a type of the Holy Grail, but seems to be a symbol for the secrets of Masonry, as understood by Henry Wallace. In his book, The Occult Conspiracy, Michael Howard says of Wallace that the Secretary of Agriculture was well versed in occult knowledge. In a letter to his Russian guru, he stated, "The search, whether it be for the lost word of Masonry, or the Holy Chalice, or the potentialities of the age to come, is the one supremely worthwhile objective. So may we strive for the chalice and the flame above it." Howard says the chalice he refers to is the Holy Grail, regarded by the Rosicrucians as a feminine symbol for perfection, and the age to come is the dawning of the Aquarian Age. The concept of the flaming chalice is another repeated theme in the paintings of Nicholas Roerich.
And you can see this entity holding the chalice, and there's a flame coming up from the middle of the cup part of the chalice. This is a painting of Prophet Muhammad, and interestingly, he's viewing a specter of a person of some sort or other who's bearing in the heart area the chalice that's burning the flame. That's consistent with Zoroastrian motifs as well as Agni Yoga. But when I was in Isfahan, for example, and in Tehran, I visited the Zoroastrian temples, and those chalices that bear the flames are as big as I am. And I'm sure that Nicholas Roerich had the occasion to see those chalices in the Zoroastrian temples in his journeys through the East and the Near East. But this is definitely Muhammad. He's named it Muhammad the Prophet. But for some interesting reason, Muhammad is viewing some kind of spiritual entity with that fire-bearing chalice in the heart zone.
While Roerich's paintings are today kept in a modest museum in Manhattan, they were once kept in a towering building on the Upper West Side. In the 1920s, Roerich was supported by a wealthy benefactor and Freemason named Louis Horch. Like Wallace, Horch considered Roerich to be his guru and financed the construction of a massive building to honor him. It was called the Master Building. During this era, Roerich designed what he called a peace banner that went along with the Roerich Peace Pact that had been signed by Henry Wallace. The symbol was simply 3 circles in a triangle formation. This symbol can be seen even today, engraved on the black cornerstone of the Master Building. Buff Perry and others believe that certain arcane contents, including the Stone of Destiny, were placed inside this cornerstone when it was laid.
This is the seal over the cornerstone of the Master Building that is at the corner of 103rd and Riverside Drive. And here you see 1929 and the 3 circles with an M and then an R beneath it. And I believe that means Master Roerich, meaning master building in effect. He was like an edifice to people at that time.
So the idea of the master building was the idea that Roerich himself was the master, is that
Absolutely,
correct?
Absolutely. The whole building was built for him, for his use, in his honor and in his name. And it was to be used as a place where there would be art galleries, art studios. Great writers of the past lived there.
Joseph Campbell was there?
Joseph Campbell lived there for a period of time.
Joseph Campbell was a highly regarded esoteric who wrote about the power of myth. His works are still celebrated by the Theosophical Society to this day. Another 20th century luminary who frequented the Master Building was Manly P. Hall. Hall was clearly interested in Roerich, and in his books wrote about the symbolism of the stone that is called the Grail.
And we don't know where that stone is today. I think that Buff Perry knows a little more about where it might be now, but some believe it's in the foundation stone of the Roerich Building, the Roerich Museum there in New York. Mr. Hall used to go to the Roerich Museum in his early days, just after he had written the big book called The Secret Teachings of All Ages, because there in the penthouse of the Roerich Building met the very elite, the esoteric elite you might say, who were really into not only the mysteries of the great world religions, but also the mysteries that many people don't know that was part of the motivation in the founding of our own country.
While the master building today is used mainly for apartment living, the penthouse located in the upper levels is still there. Is it possible that Henry Wallace could have been one of those esoteric elite who met there with men like Manly Hall? There is at least one record of his meeting with Nicholas Roerich at the master building. American Heritage reports that Wallace visited the museum and was thrilled beyond measure to receive a brief audience with Roerich. He found the artist's appearance, demeanor, and plans to promote culture and peace extremely impressive. He admired Roerich's paintings because he said they gave him a smooth feeling inside. The article goes on to say that Wallace avidly read the painter's writings and frequently communicated with the officials of the Roerich Museum. Whether FDR himself ever attended the penthouse meetings is unknown, but it is reported that the president's mother was an admirer of Roerich, and Roosevelt himself had once met and been favorably impressed by the artist. It is also worth noting that in 1932, First Lady-elect Eleanor Roosevelt gave a lecture at the Roerich Museum Lecture Hall. American Heritage writes, the State Department grew very nervous about Roerich, but he had influence in the Oval Office. With such connections, is it possible that inside the mysterious penthouse at the upper level of the master building, the so-called esoteric elite decided on the design for America's dollar bill? Remember that the master building was finished in 1929. The Great Seal was not placed on America's currency until 6 years later, in 1935. All of the players in this drama were involved in Masonry, including the Secretary of Treasury, Henry Morgenthau.
When Morgenthau, the Secretary of the Treasury, regretted having placed the all-seeing eye on the verso of the American dollar bill, he made reference to a small Kabbalistic group that used that symbol in their ceremonies, and because of that regretted that that symbol ever would have made it onto the dollar bill, which to me is rather peculiar because Masons for centuries had already used that all-seeing eye in their lodges, in their literature, and in all means and manner of expression.
Perry's suggestion is that while Morgenthau, as a Mason, might not object to a Masonic symbol, he was concerned about the influence of what appeared to be a personality cult surrounding Nicholas Roerich.
He was a little embarrassed that perhaps all of the information got out that Nicholas Roerich, the guru, would have been instrumental in seeing to it that that symbol ended up on the dollar bill.
We took a trip to the master building and met with the building's historiographer, Mildred Spicer. She lives inside one of the apartments with a view through the right-angled windows that are famous for being the first of their kind. Whether or not they were intended to represent the Pythagorean right triangle, a favorite symbol among Masons, is for the viewer to decide.
Roerich's idea was to have that Mason symbol put on the dollar bill, so every resident in the U.S. is connected to Roerich through the dollar bill.
While we were there, Mildred confirmed that Roerich's chief financial supporter, Louis Horch, was in fact a 33rd degree Freemason.
And that was given, sent to me by Oriole. Her father was Louis Horch, and she and her mother, Nettie Horch, were very involved with the museum.
and China called for a global currency and a new world order. Which brings us to the other half of the dollar bill's design, the American eagle, that some believe represents the mythical phoenix, a bird that is said to destroy itself by fire. But according to Wolfram von Eschenbach, the power of the phoenix lies in the stone of destiny. In Parsifal, he writes, "By virtue of this stone, the phoenix is burned to ashes, in which she is reborn. Thus does the phoenix molt her feathers, after which she shines dazzling and bright, and as lovely as before." If these ideas are truly embraced by secret societies, could this suggest the intentional destruction of the American dollar, which will then force our financial networks into a global economy, resulting in a new Atlantean empire that extends to all the earth? As Buff Perry mentioned earlier, the stone is also called the Chintamani stone. As a symbol, the stone unites the occult traditions of both Eastern and Western mysticism. One thing is certain, those who practice the occult believe this artifact is the key to achieving the great work of all secret societies. Mark Amaru Pinkham is the co-director of a group called the International Order of Gnostic Templars. In his article titled "Nicholas Roerich and the Chintamani Stone, a Holy Grail from Sirius," he writes that data regarding the Chintamani Stone maintains that it was brought to Earth by Syrian missionaries to eventually help precipitate a one-world civilization. He says there is some indication that one part of the stone has been the sacred stone of the Kaaba, which has united millions of Muslims around the globe. Pinkham goes on to write that it is known that a portion of the Chintamani stone was given to the League of Nations, whose stated goals were the creation of a one-world civilization. The association of the stone as a symbol of unity is an important part of how it is said to have come to America.
It has to do with the secret history of America and why that stone arrived here, who brought it.
Oddly enough, this mysterious artifact may provide the missing link to understanding how America has gone from being a Christian nation to a country beset with pagan statues, pagan monuments, and occult icons. For years, Buff Perry was financed by a leading member of the Philosophical Research Society to hunt down this stone of destiny.
I learned about this stone going into Roerich's hands through the director of the Rosicrucian Order, the curator of the Rosicrucian Museum in San Jose, California.
The whole concept of the stone as the Holy Grail represents the so-called perfecting of mankind. This is the theme of Rosicrucianism and Freemasonry. As Manly Hall writes, to the mystic, the stone is divine power, an ancient symbol of the perfected and regenerated man whose divine nature shines forth. After years of research, Buff Perry now believes the stone was brought to America by secret societies from Scotland in the years preceding the American Revolution. For them, the stone was to empower the foundation of a new republic.
Why is it called the foundation stone for America?
The foundation stone for America because it was brought here by the Jacobites who had been arrested at Preston in 1715 in their attempt to overthrow the kings.
The kings in question are the line of English kings who succeeded King James II. who was deposed from his throne in 1688 and succeeded by William of Orange. But the supporters of James rebelled against the deposing of their favorite monarch. They were called Jacobites, a name derived from Jacobus, the Latin version of James. In short, the Jacobites were mostly Scottish Highlanders who were determined to restore James and the House of Stuart to the English throne. But the reason King James II was deposed presents a powerful clue as to why America has been steadily transformed into a cornucopia of pagan and occult philosophies.
King James had proclaimed that Jews and Presbyterians and Quakers and Catholics and even Ottomans should be embraced by the Church of England. That's why he was deposed. So the subsequent formation of this Jacobite revolutionary social order was in reaction to his deposition and in support of his embrace of Jews, Presbyterians, Quakers, Catholics, and Ottoman Muslims.
Since the Protestant English rejected James' ecumenical ideas and also feared that the hand of Rome was somehow involved, the Scottish Jacobites engaged in a series of rebellions against the new line of English kings. But their rebellions were ultimately crushed, and as a result, many of the Jacobite fugitives fled across the waters of the Atlantic to America.
In 1715, there was a rebellion in a place called Preston, northern England. Many of the Jacobites were arrested and deported or exiled to America. Standish family, Anson family, notable families in American history, pre-revolutionary history. Families that then went on to become part of the War of Independence, the American Revolution. Notable Masons and Freemasons.
These notable Freemasons were the survivors of the Jacobite resistance in Scotland, a land with a long history of secret societies, whose influence is both mysterious and extensive. Consider that centuries earlier, the Knights Templar fled persecution and are said to have hidden themselves within the Masonic lodges of Scotland. In the 19th century, Albert Pike would develop the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, which would become the most powerful arm of Masonry in America. Meanwhile, President Woodrow Wilson once said that every line of strength in American history is a line colored with Scottish blood. Perhaps the best example of the Jacobite influence in early America is found in Hugh Mercer, often called an unsung hero of the American Revolution. Mercer was a Jacobite doctor who supported the cause against England until their final defeat at the Battle of Culloden in 1746. He was then forced to flee to America, leaving his homeland behind. He served as Brigadier General in the Continental Army and was a close personal advisor to George Washington. It's even believed that it was Hugh Mercer who suggested that General Washington make his famous crossing of the Delaware River on Christmas of 1776. Incredibly, one of Hugh Mercer's children would marry into the Patton family and ultimately produce World War II hero General George S. Patton, whose blood and guts reputation was certainly in keeping with the Jacobite tradition. But in the years prior to the American Revolution, Hugh Mercer became a member of the Masonic Lodge in Fredericksburg, Virginia, the early members of which are said to be a who's who of Revolutionary War heroes. Mercer's fellow members included George Washington and James Monroe. At least 8 Masons from this lodge served as generals during the American Revolution, while 2 of them would go on to become American presidents. The Fredericksburg Lodge still exists today, and on its website states that it was chartered by the Grand Lodge of Scotland, July 21st, 1758. A history of the lodge says the following. The lodge was formed by men who had been made Masons earlier and elsewhere, Scotland most likely. There was in Fredericksburg in the 1750s a notable Scottish mercantile presence. Many of those early lodge members bore Scottish surnames, and it was to Scotland, not England, that the lodge later turned for a proper charter. Is it possible that the influence of the Scottish Jacobite rebels worked as an undercurrent that helped to inspire the American Revolution?
These families, they come under the general umbrella term Jacobite, were the real core population that led to ultimately to the War of Independence.
Consider that the 3 Jacobite uprisings are referred to as rebellions. During the Revolutionary era, the motto, "Rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God," was adopted, a motto that Benjamin Franklin wanted to include on the design of the Great Seal.
But I'll tell you this, I've always said, as long as I've been in the struggle for freedom, that I'm going to be obstinate. I'm going to live at least as long until I see the demise of the United States of America's government. Well, guess what? Right now, today, the American empire is dying. It's disintegrating. So now I can go home. Now I can go to the other side.
I think if anyone could have done anything to help us with the Black Kills, truly, I believe that it would have been Russel Means. He was such an activist, and even though I may not agree totally with what he does, yet I believe that the fire and the spirit he has to get to keep the rights of the Indian, of the Lakota people, and also to make the government honor the treaties and to make them to hold them to that. I don't know of anyone but Russel Means that could have done that, and that could maybe still do it, but
so he could understand it. And he still lied. He signed the treaty with us, agreeing to everything we said. Got as far back as going back to Washington, D.C. to pass the treaty with the Congress and the President. They stopped in Chicago and changed the treaty and took away all our land that was in the state, that is now in the state of Nebraska. We own 80% of Nebraska.
I just went to the United States Congress and I told them that their own courts, their highest court, ruled that they stole sacred land from us. I told them they took trillions of dollars worth of uranium, gold, timber, other resources off that land they stole. Our people are to date impoverished.
And I expect you to have a decent language. See, that's why English is the language of deceit. Very easy to lie in English. That's why business is conducted in English, the whole world, because it is a deceitful language. My nation, the Lakota, we were the first nation to militarily defeat the United States of America on the field of battle. And it ended in 1868, when the United States of America begged us for peace. And we gave it to them. And they wanted to sign a treaty of peace based on international law. And so we granted that to them. In fact, we already knew the Washichu couldn't be trusted. So we allowed him to write his treaty of peace in his own language.
I grew up with the language around me, with my mom and my uncles and my aunties all speaking the language. But they didn't teach it to the children. And if you ask a lot of people why they didn't teach the children, why they didn't expect the children to learn the language, they'll say that it was because of the boarding schools. They weren't allowed to speak the language, and that they in fact were often hit when they spoke the language. So, and you know, for them, they didn't want their children to be speaking the language, or else they would get beaten for it.
Our language cannot be written down. They're trying to write it down now, using the stupid European alphabet. 26 characters.
Why? America has to settle up. They're not keeping their promises they made in the treaties. These treaties are law, according to their system, under their own constitution. Article 6, Supreme Law of the Land. The chiefs back then retained possession of the sacred Black Hills in those treaties. They subsequently stole the Black Hills when they discovered gold in it. They still retain ownership of those stolen lands that they have to make settlement for yet. The issue's still alive on those stolen lands that they got.